In August 1955, I sailed from Southampton to Hong Kong on my way to Beijing to study Chinese. This beast here is an imitation, it's not an original, of a Tang dynasty camel. And it used to sit with its companion piece, a horse, in the residence in Beijing when I was the ambassador between 1988 to 1991. And the camel reminded me of the very first time I was in Beijing, because it was entirely the same. You'd have recognized it if you'd gone there in the 16th century, 15th century, as the capital built by Yongle, the emperor, the second of the Ming emperors, who founded Beijing as the capital of China. In those days, it was just exactly a walled city, the Tartar city and the Chinese cities of the south. It had a number of gates all the way around, and it was very exciting to see a total wall all the way around the city of Peking. Now, the contrast between 1955 and today is enormous. In 1955, Peking was, for me and my friends, a place to walk around and study the ancient civilization of China, the ancient buildings, the drum tower, the bell tower, the city gates, the astronomical instruments which were on the city walls. And it seemed to me that Peking then was like a treasure in aspic. You could walk around and perk up 5 or 6 centuries of Chinese history and Chinese architecture.
But what was outside the walls?
Outside the walls was countryside.
Just fields? Or?
Fields, paddy fields, no, not paddy fields, but agricultural fields. And the Tiananmen Square was not there. The Tiananmen Gate was there, and the front of it, there was a narrow road. It went down to the front gate of the city, the Tiananmen. And the atmosphere was very harsh. The architecture was ancient, the politics was modern and very harsh indeed. I was there only 6 years after the Chinese Revolution, when the communists came to power, and the people wore very drab clothes. The only sign of modernization was the carts, which were pulled by manpower, had rubber tires in before they were iron tires. And so it was feudal in appearance, feudal in style, and political movements were going on the whole time. It was a harsh but very honest place. It was my first post. I did language studies there and a year in the office of the Chargé d'Affaires. And it was my last post. It was in 1988 and 1991. And the contrast was just fantastic. The second time I went to China was between 1964 and 1966, when I had married Janet and we'd got 2 children, yourself and Jamie, in a Hutung house very close to the Forbidden City, and used to dot in and out of the houses and come back with Chinese buns which the villagers had given to you. You wore, I remember, a mask with goggles. I don't know where you got it, like a motor bicyclist. There are lovely photographs of the 2 of you standing in front of our house, a typical Chinese house, on the plinths on either side, looking like lions. And it was a very happy time, but again politically awful, because it was the beginning of the Cultural Revolution in 1966. We had a sentry box outside the house with a guard in it with a fixed bayonet. And I was annoyed at this because I thought it was an intrusion on our privacy. In actual fact, it was a guard to stop us being messed up by the Red Guards. The Cultural Revolution was a ghastly time in China, a very awful time. We had all the Hutong that we lived in was covered with wall posters, and the noise of the kangaroo trials were awful all round about. When we went back for the third time, my third time in China in 1988, I could not believe the difference.
1988?
In 1988, because in 1965, when Angus was born in Beijing, the walls were demolished completely. And where the line of the walls was is now one of the first ring roads around the modern Beijing. There are now 6 highways around Beijing, about the size of the M25, 6 of these round and round in the city. The population of China when I first went was 580 million. By then it had grown to, but now it will be in the middle of this century 1.6 billion people. So not only did the population expand, but actually the city expanded and grew and grew and grew to the modern city it is today with traffic jams and all the rest of it. The huge turning point happened after the death of Mao Zedong. Deng Xiaoping came to power, and the first thing he did was to say that China had to open up to the outside world. And gradually, since that opening to the outside world began in 1978 until 2016, the city has grown more and more to integrate with the outside world. The economy has grown enormously. The fashions have grown. It was delightful to go back in 1988 and see boys and girls bicycling down the streets in Western dress, holding hands. The atmosphere was so much more liberal, friendly, open to the outside world.
In the 50s, you remember seeing camels going through the streets, or was it?
The first thing that I saw when I went to China, we took a long time to go from Hong Kong to Shanghai to Beijing by train, and the train went past the south wall of the city and then through the gate towards Tiananmen Square, quite near there, where Tiananmen Square is now. The station was there. And as you pass one of the city gates, a huge fortress called the Fox Tower, I looked out the train window and I saw a line of camels, rather like this, 6 camels with sacks of coal on their backs, being led by a man at the beginning of the line of them. They were carrying coal from the coal mines to the west of Peking, through to be got to Tianjin to export or to go somewhere, I don't remember, but it was just a line of camels. I wasn't expecting camels in China, and it was a vision that's been with me ever since.
Was it a very dirty city with all of the smoke?
You found that if you went down Wangfujing Street, the pavement was covered with spit, and there was a lot of consumption in China, and people spat blood onto the pavement as you went along. They spat everywhere.
The honey carts.
Hmm?
The honey carts.
And then the drainage, there were no main drains in Hutong, and so about every 3 or 4 weeks, or perhaps a month, you get a terrible smell in the Hutong. And a cart came around, we called them the honey carts, because we would pick up all the detritus and all the waste from the what do you call them, cesspits?
Septic tanks.
Septic tanks in every house. It'd spoon out all the stuff into the canvas bag on their back. They hooked it out, popped it in the bag, and then emptied it into the honey cart and took it away to some god-awful place. So it was, there were no public lavatories, really. So the smell in Peking was quite strong. usually.
And was it noisy back then in the 50s? Or
Well, nothing but bicycles. They would be like a flock of bees. You'd see a crowd of people, maybe 200 or 300 people bicycling through the streets. And then you'd see buses with, on top of the buses, a great big bag of gas, which went down into the back of the engine and propelled the buses forward. There were gas tanks on top of the buses.
a canvas bag?
A
of
canvas
gas.
bag full of gas on top of the bus. Very peculiar.
And so, is the characters for a bus? Is it public?
Public altogether gas chariot. Gung gung cheetah. Public altogether, 4 characters. Public altogether gas chariot.
And they literally were powered by gas.
And they were gas chariots.